everybody. Ed Catto here. Very excited to see you at the latest San Diego panel. Thrilled to be with you as we're going to be speaking with four brilliant authors about their books that delve deep into comic creators, learning a little bit about the people behind the comics that we all love, and doing a deep dive. We'll be talking about a lot of different things over this next hour. I'd love to start with introductions from our great panelists. Jennifer, could you please tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do and your book, of course, too, please?
I'm Jennifer DeRoss. I wrote Forgotten All-Star, Biography of Gardner Fox. And I also work in the field of education right now. I am currently a early outreach and referral coach, although that part is coming to an end. And then I will be full-time a step coach with the Career Pathways program.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ken, please introduce yourself and tell everyone your amazing background.
Well, it's not so amazing, but I'm Ken Quattro. I'm a long-time comic book fan, longer than I'm even going to tell you about. I've been writing and researching comics for about 50 years. My latest book, actually my only book right at this moment, was called Invisible Men, the Trailblazing Black Artists of Comic Books, which concerns the first generation of Black comic book artists who worked in the field starting in the 1930s and 40s. Other than that, I just spend all my day researching, writing about comic books. I've been doing it a long time and keep doing it until they pry the computer board out of my cold, dead hands.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we hope that doesn't come for many, many years.
Me too.
Stuff is brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Bret, we're anxious to hear a little bit about you and your book. And I don't think you're as much of a comic fan as Ken is. Is that true?
It's no, that's absolutely true. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here. And I am like an interloper here because I am not an expert on comics, that's for sure. I came to the story of Lev Gleason and wrote my book, American Daredevil, Comics, Communism, and the Battles of Lev Gleason through my family connection, because Lev Gleason was my great uncle. He died before I was born. So writing this book was sort of my way of getting to know him and really trying to understand what drove him, his great success as a publisher of comic books. He wasn't an artist or a writer. He was a publisher. So he was behind the scenes employing folks. And he had a vision that was really political in nature. So the book is about the comic books, but it's also about his politics and what drove him in that sphere. So it's great to be here. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank folks like Ken who've been really welcoming to me as someone very new to the field of comics. I'm a lawyer. I've written other things, but nothing that I've done in my past relates to comic books. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, although I dare say you've become quite the knowledgeable guy, especially about Golden Age comic books. I mean,
I don't know about that, but I try.
Yeah. Last but not least, Danny, good to see you. Could you remind us just a little bit of your impressive career and tell us about you've written many books about comics. Can you tell us about the book that we're going to focus on today, please?
Okay, I can do that. I'm Danny Fingeroth. I worked as a writer and editor at Marvel Comics when many of you were even born, but quite a while ago. I'm no stranger to controversy, being the editor who greenlit the Clone Saga. This is my book, A Marvelous Life, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, which has excited a little bit of controversy, which is good. Controversy means sales, and that attention that I'm addicted to. I've written in various phases of my life. I've written a book called Superman on the Couch, sort of a psychological approach to superheroes and comics. I wrote Disguised as Clark Kent, about the Jewish contributions to the origins of the superheroes. I also am the chair of a Will Eisner Week, which is an annual celebration of Will Eisner that we have every year. And so if you want to do something relating to Will anytime, but especially in March, which Will's birthday was March, March 6th of 1917, send me an email, Danny@DannyFingeroth.com. So I have a deep and long-standing interest in the founders of comics. And, as everybody here knows, the more you study these people, the more you find out how complicated they were, and the more difficult it becomes for people to accept either good or bad about them. Whether you say great things about somebody or terrible things about somebody, there's going to be somebody vehemently disagreeing with you, especially thanks to the anonymity of the internet. And the only thing and I'll shut up, but Bret, I did want to say one oddball connection that you and I sort of have is that after I left Marvel, I worked for different media entertainment companies. And one of those companies, thanks to your book, I discovered a lot thanks to your book, but was at the same address as Lev Gleason Productions.
114 East 32nd Street.
Yes, sir. That's the address.
Wow, that's incredible.
I didn't know that till I read your book.
The Parklet between Park Avenue and Lexington is what it was called when Uncle Lev first rented space there. What a connection.
How did they come up with that name?
Oh, yeah. Jeez. Yeah, I've always thought it'd be great to have like the New York City tour just for comic nerds to see the offices, right?
I think somebody's done that. I think somebody has made a map of that.
Yeah.
I think there may be somebody who does a guided tour. But
yeah, that'd be cool. That could be my retirement job. There we go.
Yeah, good. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great?
You have to move to New York, Ken. That's the only problem.
Oh, never mind. That's okay.
Come on, welcome.
No, that's okay. I've been to New York. I prefer Midwest. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I miss it. It's been too long. I think so. As a good moderator, I have all my questions laid out. Danny, you kind of started to get to the heart of the matter with that gag or that line that you just said about people struggle to learn about creators they like and take the good with the bad. I wonder if you could elaborate that on a little bit, and then we'll open it up to the panelists as we talk about maybe some of the things that you learned as you researched your books.
Specifically about Stan Lee, who is about as controversial figure as there is in comics. I guess one of the things I learned good, I guess, is how, the myth about Marvel, right? Marvel is a little engine that could. It started out with a handful of titles, and then, Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the Avengers and the X-Men, and they grew little by little by little, and then they took over the world. Well, before there was an implosion in the late 50s, before that, Marvel or Timely or Atlas, depending on its incarnation, published 80 titles a month. They were a huge monster of a company, and Stan oversaw the editorial and writing and art of those. So that was an interesting thing that I kind of had some inkling about, but hadn't realized quite how much, how big and how influential Timely Atlas was until Martin Goodman, the publisher, started to get cute with distribution. And it kind of blew up in their face. Look, Stan was a good guy, but he was not the world's most perfect guy. And ultimately, he was concerned about himself and his family. And, most people who worked with him, most people who stayed with him really loved him and were loyal to him. But people who didn't like him, who didn't like working in that manner, who felt that he or Marvel were exploiting, most of them got the hell out eventually and sometimes came back. But it was, I guess as somebody who grew up loving Marvel and who worked there, I'm a native New Yorker. I have a certain cynical, crusty edge. So I can't say that I was shocked. And as we can talk about more, I think the people who were quote unquote used or abused by Stan were grown adults. They had like some decisions and agency in their own lives and their own life choices. You know, so he was. It would have been nice if Stan Lee was a superhero, but he wasn't a superhero. He was just a guy. You know, and you know, so that's sort of, I guess, when you write a biography about anybody, I'm sure everybody found some level of that wherever you come in thinking about the person.
Yeah. Let me ask some of the other panelists. Did anyone else have any, you know, that aha moment when maybe the person you're writing about either has feet of clay or did things that you weren't maybe thrilled with, or maybe even, it might be a separate question, but the readers, as they learned more, were trying to weigh the pros and the cons?
If I can just interject real quick, that's kind of the way I write anyway. I mean, a lot of my writing is based probably 95% upon primary sources, newspaper articles, contemporaneous information, letters, whatever I can, you know, for any given subject. And in doing so, I try to present it straight down the line. I have a journalistic background. So I try to take like a journalistic approach to my writing, in the sense of that I'll give you the information and I try to let you, the reader, you know, decide for yourself what sort of person this was. I've been approached a lot of times to write biographies and that by different families. You know, I can think of a half a dozen right off the top of my head who they said, hey, could you write a book about so-and-so, you know, we'll help you with it. And I say, yeah, I'll do it, only if you give me free rein to write exactly what I find. Well, that right there turns off the spigot, because nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, they want, you know, a very nuanced narrative that they want to present.
Yeah.
And that's not what I do personally. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, you know, because to me, everything is valid. You know, it's all part of the whole scheme of comics history, or any history, you know.
Yeah,
but
I remember
that's just not my thing.
Yeah, I remember that Charles Schultz book that came out a few years ago.
Exactly.
I think the guy started writing, I forget the author, but he started writing
right
at the behest of the family, and then he had to publish independently because they were so mad.
Right. And it's easy to do. You know, it's easy to do. You know, somebody like Danny, you know, who's personally knew Stan Lee and stuff like that, you know, you're almost not forced, but you know, you have almost a given take that you're going to take anyway. And you know, and I understand there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I mean, I would, you know, I would contest that. I mean, I don't want to, you know, I think, you know, my book was not authorized by Stan, by Marvel, by anybody. It was just a book I wrote. So look, I mean, if you came away from my book feeling that it was overly positive, I can't help how people feel. My aim was to lay out the facts and let people make their own decisions, you know, I mean.
Well, and that's it. I mean, that's, you know, to me, that's the way, you know, history should be presented. You know, I've been involved in history, you know, forever. And that's the way I read history. That's the way I like my histories to read, you know, but there's nothing wrong with having a given perspective. It's just, people have to understand that when you read your book. And like, I know that newest book about the Stan Lee, which I'm sure you're going to be asked about, the Reisman book, you know, takes a totally different perspective from what I haven't read it. So I can't even comment on it, but.
Yeah, let's pause on that one.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
I do want to get, that's fine. It's all good. I was hoping you two would fight a little more, actually. But...
Oh, I'm not going to fight. I'm not a fighter.
We're only 20 minutes in, so, you know.
That's right.
Okay, you've got time.
I can just weigh in on that question. You know,
Please.
The thing about Lev Gleason was that he was at the center of controversy so many times for so long that I think that writing the book was not there. It wasn't about sort of whitewashing his history, because he was the kind of guy who dove right into controversy. And so, you know, on two fronts, really, one would be the comic books and Crime Does Not Pay leading to a backlash and sort of the code. And he wasn't behind the scenes. He was leading the industry association. He was debating Dr. Wortham on the radio. He was writing op-eds in papers. He was, when television came along, participating in panel discussions like this on television. So he put himself right out there. And then on, the communism side, he was very involved in progressive politics. And as a result of that, was accused of being a communist. So to the extent there was a mystery to uncover, it was, well, was he a communist or wasn't he? And that's kind of where you touch on, I think, your question, Ed, which is even today in 2021, there are some folks who will see that, he may have been a communist and just dismiss him out of hand. Like that means he was un-American. That means that he was unpatriotic. And what I try to do in the book is to sort of complicate that narrative. It's neither he was a hero or he was a villain. He had, he basically was a progressive FDR Democrat who, when he was younger, was involved in some, communist activities. And I think what was more important to me than the question of was he a member of the party or not was, well, what drove him and why was he treated the way he was, given that the ideas that he was propagating in his comics, but also just directly through his other publications, he was very active publishing things other than comic books. Right. Those ideas, really, are they that controversial in light of history and looking back on the way things worked out in terms of our involvement in World War II and the fight against fascism abroad and here at home, which, just to end on the note that, clearly that's a fight that continues.
Sure, right. Yeah, I almost felt like after reading your book, Bret, like I wish I could have met the guy, right? Like what a fascinating, multifaceted person. And, if I could have met him, we'd talk about comics for, the first 20 minutes and then all these other things that he was involved with. It's just fascinating.
Can I just say something real quick?
Yeah.
I've done a lot of research about Lev Gleason too, as you know, and he's one of my faves as far as like comic guys are concerned. How do I put this? Okay. I've done a lot of background research into the communism side, and he was a communist. I mean, I got written proof of all that stuff of that. And one of these days, somewhere down the road, I got an entire book planned around, he's an aspect of it. But the Communist Party was very influential in certain aspects of Golden Age comics. I don't want to go into it too much because there's a lot of information there that's going to surprise a lot of people when I first bring this out about funding and stuff like that. And again, I got documented proof of a lot of this stuff and that, but just so he was a communist, but just like Bret says, a communist of 1935 is totally different than what the perception is of what a communist is now. A lot of people who dabbled in communism in the 20s and 30s in particular are basically what we consider progressives.
Right.
Nowadays, if you look at their
worried about like
their stance and stuff like that, you would look at it and go like, what's the problem? It's just like everything in history, perceptions change over time. And even the Communist Party changed their perceptions.
And how does that jive with people who say, claim that, like, say, comics, Timely in particular, but comics in general, like CIA fronts, or were very involved with, in bed with the government. With
see, you're touching on something, Danny, that I'm going right at you about. I don't want to say too much here. Let me just say that there were some CIA connections to comics. And again, it's going to surprise some people when they find out who was involved in this stuff. It's a very intricate thing. And there's also religious aspects to this too.
Wow. What
okay.
a tease. Can I moderate the panel of this book when you come out with it?
If I'm not dragged out of my house by some guys in black outfits and taken somewhere, I don't know.
Oh my God!
It's going to be covering a lot of really sensitive information and stuff like that, and that's why I've been doing a lot of stuff. It's something I've been working on for a long time. Yeah. And I found some really explosive kind of stuff that's really surprising. Yeah. But anyway, I just want to say that Lev Gleason was probably one of the most brilliant people ever to work in comics. I mean, we talk about creatives as being, the intellect of certain creatives and stuff like that, like Will Eisner or whoever. But I have found from my research that some of the most brilliant people who've worked in comics were some of the people who published them. And I'd put Lev Gleason in there, Lloyd Jacquet would be in there, Archer St. John. Those three men right there, brilliant and highly accomplished in other areas other than comic books. That just happened to be something that they did amongst about a million other things that they did in their lives. Yeah. And see, that's one of the, I better shut, this isn't my panel, so I'm going to shut up.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you for that. That's just fantastic. Let me put a pin in it. I want to shine the spotlight on Jennifer, because I think we've talked about a couple very controversial figures, well-loved people with some controversy behind them. You wrote a book about Gardner Fox. I'm not sure how, well, I am sure, but I'll pretend so you tell the tale. I'm not sure why you chose him, but he strikes me as the guy who, ironed his slacks and, put a tie on before he went to bed, right? Like he was such a prim, proper gentleman, forward-thinking community members. Is that true? Am I right? And then I'd love for you to address, was there anything controversial that you found about it?
So I think you really hit the head on the nail of the head there, whatever. Yes, he was very, very prim and proper and forward thinking, and surprisingly so, especially because one of the things that is lobbied at him often is this whole idea of him being a sexist for making Wonder Woman the secretary of the Justice Society and the Justice League, and also the way he handled Batgirl. And I think that looking at the larger picture, you actually see that it was kind of the opposite. He put a lot of women in positions that you don't see in a lot of comic books, where they were like right there in the thick of it with usually their partner, who happened to be a superhero. And so some of that is that like changing times thing, where at the time he was writing women that were really progressive. And now we look back and we can see some areas that could have been better. But I think that he did a good job with what he was given. And some of that has to do with the large number of women in his life that were so empowered. Even like when he graduated from law school, he graduated with women, which was really a rare thing back then. So it would have been odd for him to write females in comics or in the pulps or whatever else, where they were just passive, because that wasn't his lived experience.
Yeah, right. As you researched him, was there anything in his life that maybe struck you as odd or that bothered you as you were learning about it, Jennifer?
I would say the only thing that really surprised me is the way that he was so nice and giving and supportive, but then he was also, there was this underpinning of like, he had a scowl everybody could remember. And if somebody showed up and he was working, he would just not talk to them. Like he had no interest in breaking his work day. And he would get migraines when he didn't get dinner on time and things like that. So he was very, very conscious and
that's a good idea, actually. Yeah.
I think that whole generation had ambivalence about working in comics in the first place. They didn't grow up wanting to, even, we look back and go, this was great stuff. It formed our childhood. It formed the popular culture around us and so many, just phrases of speech. But I mean, I think, I think for Gardner, I know for Stan, that it was kind of like, okay, so I'm a big deal in comics, who cares? I mean, I think there was some aspect of that, you know, that they couldn't shake.
Yeah, that probably
opposite though. He loved writing in comics. He gave up a job as a lawyer to work in comics.
Yeah, you hear that, Bret?
That's my next move.
There you go.
That's interesting, that idea, you know, because I think Lev really wrestled with that point, Danny, which is, you know, is at the time he was in a position of defending comics, and he tried out a lot of different arguments. You know, one of his arguments was free speech. How dare you tell my readers what they can and cannot read? Another argument was, how dare you look down on comics? You know, this is not an art form to be denigrated. This is an art form that's just as legitimate as, you know, Macbeth, he would have said. And then, of course, the educational argument, you know, that it helps kids learn how to read. Learn about crime, you know, it helps them respect authority and not commit crimes. That's a debatable one right there. But, you know, I think for him, like Ken said, I mean, he was there at the birth of the comic book, essentially, in Manhattan, but he was really a fish out of water. I mean, the other folks around him with whom he did business, with whom he associated, were so different from him. I mean, he had grown up in the suburbs of Boston. He went to a fancy prep school. He went to Harvard for a year before dropping out to fight in France. So when he showed up in Manhattan, he had a very different set of life experiences. And so for him, comics were exciting because they were a vehicle for, of course, making money, but also disseminating ideas to a large population of people, young and old. So but there was that tension. It's like, well, you know, is it truly art? Is it truly literary form that he has to grapple with as well?
Yeah. Ken, you wrote about several different gentlemen, all men, in your book, Invisible Men. Can you speak to that a little bit? Maybe take one or two of the folks. Like, very interested if you learned things that either surprised you or you were shocked or you didn't like.
Right. It's like I said, I wrote specifically, you know, particularly about these 18 Black artists were the first ones I identified. Since I've written the book, I found a few others, but there was this group of Black artists who worked in comic books primarily during World War II. And they had a unique experience because it was an opportunity provided to them by the circumstances of the time, by World War II itself coming in, and just different things that all happened at one time. If you want to back up a little bit, and this kind of impacts every one of these guys who worked in the golden age, is that in the 1930s, when comics were really starting here in America, they were doing everything on the fly, okay? And they were making this up as they went along. So a lot of guys ended up in comic books who, like, you know, you said, never had any intention ever working in comics. It wasn't something like they grew up, you know, drawing, trying to be, you know, Hal Foster or Alex Raymond. Some did, but a lot of them were just out of work artists, out of work writers. And the Black artists I wrote about, almost every single one of them had prior training as fine artists or illustrators and stuff like that. But what happened is in the 1930s, there's a thing called the Works Progress Administration, which is one of the New Deal programs instituted by the Roosevelt administration. And what it does, it employed a lot of out-of-work artists and writers in mainly busy work sort of things. They painted a lot of murals for libraries, or they did stuff for the 1939 World's Fair. But what happened is towards the end of the 1930s, there's a lot of pushback, particularly by Republicans in Congress, against the funding of these. Basically, you know, they said they're wasting their money on, you know, paying artists to do all this stuff and that. So by 1940, the WPA was pretty much done away with. So a lot of the artists who were working in the WPA were out on the street. Well, most of them were minority artists because, you know, the white, you know, waspish artists still managed to keep working throughout the 1930s for the most part, but the minorities didn't. And that's particularly the Black and the Jewish artists in that. And you'll find a lot of Jewish artists of that time. Bernard Krigstein, for instance, was a WPA artist. Fairstaff, Louis Fairstaff was a WPA artist. But these Black artists, almost every single one of them had worked in the WPA, and they ended up looking for a job. You know, these were guys who trained, some of these guys had trained in Europe as classical painters and stuff like that, like Elmer Stoner. I mean, he came up during the Harlem Renaissance period in the 1920s, very well-educated, highly respected painter. He couldn't get a job, so he started working in comic books. And that was the same, I saw that same scenario repeated over and over again with these men. And it's a very unique situation that was created for them, but it also provided them with an opportunity to work. Yeah. And the sad part is that at the end of World War II, when all the white artists started coming back, because there was like a guarantee at that time, if you went and served, you were offered your job back if you came back. So they all got their jobs back. And all these Black artists ended up out of comics, except for a handful, like Alvin Hollingsworth and Matt Baker were two of the few. But all the rest of them, you know, they're out of comics by 1946.
Crazy, crazy. How about this one? Here's a little different question. Thank you for that. Here's a little different question. You know, everyone's life is limited, right? You've got a certain amount of time on God's green earth. You could, if you love this stuff, you could read, you know, Hawk Girl comic books, or you could read Jennifer's Gardner Fox bio. Why do you think fans are so interested in reading these bios that you've all written? And you know, how does that sync up with? Are they reading more comics or less comics, or does it cut in? How does this thirst, this recent, I'd say, crest of a comic creator or publisher bios, what's fueling it? Why are people enjoying it so much?
I think it's because comics are more part of the cultural zeitgeist than it's ever been. You know, when we were younger, like, you know, me and Danny and you, you know, we grew up when, you know, being a comics fan was you know, you were a pariah at that time, or they thought there was something wrong with you, right?
Yeah,
you know, so
I found we were just more ignored than made pariah.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying though is now it's an accepted part of American culture. Well, I mean, you know, these huge box office, you know, blockbusters and television shows. So I think people are curious about that. And in a way, I think comic fandom has matured from what it was when we were just fans. We're fans, but it's like, oh, wait a minute, who was that guy who drew that comic? You know, tell me something about him. And I think that's part of what's behind it. But
I think a lot of these people finally got old and died. I mean, they sort of had they had these long lives, you know, and they're connected to these multi-billion-dollar properties that are not just that. I mean, obviously it's the financial side, but a lot of these characters mean so much to so many people. You know, I mean, however many people read Marvel Comics when Ken and I were growing up. Maybe there were 300,000. Well, now there's, you know, 300 million people who have seen the Avengers Endgame. You know, so the idea, you know, so certainly with Stan, that he did all those cameos helped fuel this interest in him, that he was, who is that guy? You know, I mean, somehow I don't know quite how to connect it, but somehow the whole kerfuffle over the Philip Roth biography comes to mind too. I mean, I bet there's a lot of people passionately, you know, on one side or another of this 900-page Philip Roth biography, because how could it be less than 900 pages? You know, that have probably never read a Philip Roth book, you know, but so there's, you know, in doing this is really my first full-on biography, the Stan book. And when although I've decided that he's not controversial enough, so I'm working on books about Bob Dylan and Jack Ruby, because I figure Stan Lee is not controversial enough. You know, I thought let me see how much other trouble I can get in. But what people really want to know is, here's this successful person who I admire or hate, whatever, whatever it is, but who's an exceptional person. When you're writing a biography, and again, maybe this is just talking for me, I feel I'm almost writing around. I'm describing everything about this person except what is it that made them be a genius? Or what made, you can't describe, I can't, I don't pretend to have the skill to say what that, God-given ability is, but you can sort of describe, how is this person like me? How is this person different from me? How is he like people I knew? How is he like my parents? How is he, you can, so, and it does, so it's very much, a human story. Like, I mean, I tried to structure my Stan book like it was a novel. I tried to give a little cliffhanger at the end of every chapter. I tried to add a little mystery to it. So I think that's part of it. Just humans are curious about what makes exceptional people tick and how they're like us and how they're not like us.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think just to pick up on what Danny said about the process, Lev Gleason died in the early 70s. And so he obviously is long gone. Most people who knew him have passed away. Several of them passed away while I was writing the book, which is just one of the really most, it's writing a book about someone who's gone, especially a family member, it can be very challenging, not just because it's hard to find stuff, but also because you literally feel like memories are slipping away, and you're grasping on for whatever you can find. And to your point about writing around the person, I really had to do a lot of that in this book, relying on the public record, following in the footsteps of like what Ken has done, and really just mining the documentary record, archival work, primary sources, because, for example, despite the fact that he was a publisher and he loved the written word, there was no diary, there was no correspondence for me to access. I mean, there was very, very little from Lev himself other than that was in the public domain. And so I had to really reconstruct the milieu, the context. Where was he? Where did he come from? What were other folks doing at the time? And I think that was the only way that I knew how to do it, and really try to novelize it to some extent, because the record that emerges from Lev himself is rather thin. And that is one of the challenges. I mean, even in my family, we literally have nothing. Like all we have are basically a bunch of photographs, many of which I put in the book. But in terms of what you might expect from a publisher, a very successful publisher, it's all gone. And, partly I think maybe primarily because of the political controversies that he was at the center of. But the last thing I'll say about why people are interested is I also think there's been a change in the way we view works of art and literature, which is to say, we now understand that understanding the creator and where they come from is instrumental in understanding the work itself,
right?
Which I think has not always been the case. And so I think that drives a lot of interest in especially artists and writers, learning more about them and what drove them.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Jennifer, DC came out with a book last Wednesday that had a snippet of a new Justice Society story or adventure series, and it sold out. They didn't tell anyone, and all the Justice Society fans went bananas. Did you see that connective tissue from fans like that who were interested in reading about Gardner Fox?
Oh, definitely. And I just to pick up on the previous question too, I think that right now people are really interested in studying our history and knowing how we got to this point. And biographies offer a way of novelizing the history, making it a story that's more easily consumable, that's more enjoyable to read, instead of just like, this is what happened then. This is how this affected this person. And being able to read all the different pieces of the different stories from those different perspectives, you have a much better understanding of the historical moment. And I think that's something people are really seeking out right now. And I've been very happy that a lot of people that have read the book direct message me or whatever, and they tell me that they're going back and they're reading those stories and, oh, this was in there and I didn't notice this before, and it's really, people are falling in love with Gardner Fox all over again, which is really a delightful thing.
That's great.
Well, your point is really important. I mean, because you're not just writing a story of a person, you're writing a story of a milieu and an era and a society. I mean, you know, you have to, and so it's always more about than just the person you're writing about.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I find is that you all are probably, you know, in the center as people who feel strongly about the subjects you write about one way or the other. Many people have opinions. Maybe they're misinformed. Maybe they're very well informed. I'm very interested, and maybe Danny, it's more so with your book, but I imagine all you authors deal with this, where people either take umbrage at what you wrote or disagree, and how do you deal with that as an author? And I'll throw that out to anybody. Maybe Danny, you'd like to start.
Well, always make sure to put a link to where they can buy your book when you rebut anybody. You know, you sometimes can't. I mean, sometimes you deal with people who are so committed to, you know, look, if somebody says, oh, I don't agree, and here's something that shows differently, you know, I mean, you know, say Ken, you know, unearthed that transcript about Eisner's testimony, and, you know, as a paid consultant to the Will Eisner Studios and as a longtime Eisner fan, you know, I thought, you know, I was disappointed, and I know Ken may remember I sent some emails, you know, it could be a forgery, could it be this? No, of course it was, you know, Ken did his research and you know, but I mean, I think at least he and I, in that case, you know,
that's fine.
We're civil.
We're civil, yeah. It was like, I mean, when somebody comes at you like they're a detective trying to beat a confession out of you to admit that, you know, that a point that you spent 300 pages trying to make in a book, you know, well, you couldn't, you know, you're obviously wrong, and it's so vehement and so violent. So, you know, just somebody have a discussion or even a heated disagreement, but when somebody attacks you in a personal way, well, how can you even, you know, I mean, you know, you know, I mean, I only said half jokingly, make sure there's a link for other people reading to buy the damn book, you know?
Yeah, sure. Great. Any other thoughts from the panelists on this?
It's funny. I've had disagreements with quite a few people. Because I take kind of I don't know, more of a skeptic's kind of point of view of a lot of things. And again, it's because of the journalistic training that, you know, I don't necessarily idolize everybody I write about. And that kind of irritates a lot of comic fans. And, you know, I do it, I did it today. You know, it's something, you know, yeah, I don't do purposely, but I'll just, you know, I'll state something and somebody may not like it. I just always try to be civil in every discussion I have with people. And once people start getting nasty, I have to turn it off. I mean, that's one of the things I can't stand about social media. Certain things I love, but other aspects I cannot stand. I can't stand, like, for instance, I don't curse, okay, at all. I never have my entire life. And it's just, I do it out of respect for other people, you know, and I kind of like, you know, to be treated the same way when I talk to somebody, you know, and I'll talk to anybody. I'm not afraid of anybody, you know, but, you know, as long as they keep it, you know, polite and, you know, on subject and stuff like that, I have no problem, because comic fans can be very passionate, as we all know. You know, they are. It's just, it's something, you know, especially if you've grown up reading them your entire life, you know. And I feel sorry for somebody like Danny, who wrote about, you know, probably the most, you know, the biggest third rail in comic books was, you know, Stan Lee. As soon as you say Stan Lee, people are either one side or the other, you know, and it amazes me how even, this many years later, I mean, again, just today, I saw two different Facebook pages arguing about Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. I'm going like, you gotta be.
Of course, who were not in the room or anywhere near the room or not even born when these things happened.
Yeah, and that's what amazes me. I'm going like, how can you possibly? They go like, well, he did this and he did that. You weren't there. It was 1960, okay? You weren't in the room. Let it go. Enjoy the comic books, go see the movie, and take a break.
Yeah. Well, is part of that the thirst that we all have for the truth to be out there, or if somebody is saying thing that you realize in your heart, or you think either mistakenly in your heart that is not true, that you want to set the record straight or straighten these people out?
Well, personally, like I say, I have no problem with somebody disagreeing with me, and a lot of times I learn things that way. I mean, that's how you learn things, is coming from a different perspective. But what drives me crazy is when somebody will argue with me, and I know in the first sentence they have no clue what they're talking about. It may have been something that I've researched for 30 years, and I have an entire file sitting next to me, and he's sitting there saying, one time I had a guy argue with me about something regarding Doug Wildey, okay? And he's going on and on and on. At the end of the thing, I said, like, you're quoting the article that I wrote. I said, you totally misinterpreted what I wrote. It was so stupid. It's that kind of stuff that drives me crazy, and I try to avoid arguments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you saying
somebody like Danny, I don't mind arguing with him because he knows what he's talking about.
Well, right back at you.
Yeah. Yeah. Bret, were you shocked or amazed or disgusted by any of the comic fans that came out as someone kind of new to this world?
No, I don't think so. I mean, for me, one of the interesting things about writing the book was there was Danny mentioned detectives. There were detectives who were working during Uncle Lev's life to find out the truth about him. And so part of my path was sort of following after them, getting his FBI file, reading it, and trying to parse out what was true, what wasn't true, and trying to kind of get at some of these long-standing rumors about Uncle Lev. For example, he really did disappear from the scene pretty fast. And so when I talked to, for example, Charlie Byro's family, his kids are still alive, or I met and had coffee with the son of Uncle Lev's longtime office assistant. And these are people who either knew him directly or knew him through a family connection, but they had the most outlandish theories about what happened to him after he left, because he really did disappear. He went to Alaska, he went to Cuba. His assistant son insisted to me that he was in jail and that his mom had brought him food while he was in jail because he was suffering so much. The truth is much, much less salacious and interesting than that. He basically moved to Westchester. We're talking like an hour and a half away. So I know it's a world apart from Manhattan, but it's really not that far. So I think that my goal was to just try to kind of eliminate some of the uncertainty and the mystery around this man's life, and just sort of lay it out there. Now, the last thing I'll say is, because he was the subject of an investigation, and because he was attacked, really, I was very surprised by how prominently he was featured in the mainstream media, Newsweek, Time, and certainly the conservative newspapers of the time. I mean, they had a field day with Uncle Lev. And because of that, I had to guard against the instinct, not just because he was the subject I was writing about, but because he's a relative, of defensive rather than objective. And I hope that I was able to thread the needle on that, because I was trying to eliminate some uncertainty and alleviate rumors. But I also didn't want to just sort of say, again, to our earlier discussion, that he was perfect and a superhero, by no means. But it was a little challenging because he was under attack for so many years from so many different fronts.
It was terrible. Some of the attacks are written, especially in that in the competing newspaper there in was it Chappaqua?
Yeah,
I have a hard time pronouncing that. In Chappaqua, the one that was the conservative paper.
Yeah,
almost daily they were attacking him and stuff, and horrible stuff they were writing about him. I mean, his building was vandalized, and they wrote when they say "Go home, Jew" or something like that.
Dirty Jews.
You know, dirty Jews and stuff like that. I mean, it was horrible.
It was
what they did.
Yeah. Now, his name was Lev, but just for the record, that's short for Leverett Stone Gleason. So he's, he was about as waspy as you could get, and not Jewish, but this is another panel, and Danny is much more of an expert, but Jewish, communist, progressive, urban, they're all of a piece.
All the bases.
And Uncle Lev.
Let's do that panel right after this.
Exactly. So he was, at the center of a lot of those storms, and it's a challenge to remain objective when you're writing about someone like that. But I tried my best.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I know you all tried your best, and I think your works are. I'm a big fan of each of your works. That's why I'm so delighted you accepted my invitation to come here. I could go on for another 3 hours, but we can't.
Oh, no.
we'll meet at the bar when we can really.
Okay, we'll do that.
If it goes on for another 3 hours, then we send an invoice, Ed.
Okay, yes, there you go. You're on it, Danny. I love it. I love it. Let me do a little lightning round. I'd love to hear a little bit of what you're doing, anything of interest with the book that you want to tell your fans, and of course, if you could remind us the title of your book so fans could go to their local comic shop or bookstore to purchase it. We'll start off you, Jennifer. What do you have going on, and can you remind us of your book, please?
So it is Forgotten All-Star, Biography of Gardner Fox. I'm mostly working on Jerry Bales at this point. Just to pick up on something that was mentioned just a little bit ago, as far as like the benefits of comics, that was something that Gardner Fox really believed in. Was like he saw comics as an opportunity to teach morals and ethics to children and whatnot, and that's something that Jerry Bales really picked up on, and so it feels like a natural segue to move into talking about the father of comic fandom. And then, still doing Gardner Fox stuff. In fact, I'm doing a podcast, Into the Weird, to talk about some of his sci-fi comics.
Great. And that's Into the Weird is the podcast?
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. How about you, Bret? What's going on in the land of you?
Well, again, it's American Daredevil, Comics, Communism, and the Battles of Lev Gleason. And, one of the wonderful things about working from home is that everything is transferred online. So I've been doing a lot of panel discussions and podcasts. And so if you go to bretdakin.com, I make sure to post links there to past ones. And then there are several coming up in the next, month or two. I won't mention them all, but just, bretdakin.com is where you can find them all. And it's great to just see how much interest there is in Golden Age comics history. Like we've been saying, I think it's a real boom time for that. So it's exciting.
That's great. Good. Ken, can you tell us what's next for you?
I'll probably go to bed in about an hour.
Okay.
But before that, I'm constantly
picture we need.
Oh, okay, a little beyond that. I'm constantly working on about a half a dozen projects at any one given time, because information doesn't come, at least for me, it doesn't come chronologically necessarily. I get it constantly from all different sources and stuff like that. I'm working on a sequel to this book called Invisible Men. It's going to be a second volume that we've already talked about putting out. There's been a lot of interest in this book because it's kind of crossed over outside of comics to Black history, and in particular during Black History Month and that, I was very heartened. I got a lot of positive response from a lot of people who otherwise would never read anything involving comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a couple of television interviews and spoke with the head librarian of Library of Congress and stuff like that. People who would never even, consider comic books otherwise. And to me, that's how, we'll make this whole thing grow, is by, reaching people, beyond our own little world, of comic fandom.
Yeah.
One thing I am working on, and it's probably going to be done fairly soon, is a biography of Andre Leblanc, who was a comic book artist who worked in the Will Eisner shop. He worked on a thing called Intellectual Amos, which was a brilliant little strip that appeared in the Spirit section. But other than that, he did work here in the United States. He also lived in Brazil for a number of years.
Huh.
And he was one of the leading, probably the leading Pan-American artist of all time. He did hundreds and hundreds of comic books. At the same time, he was working for Will Eisner. He was mailing stuff to Eisner, but living in Brazil and churning out all these other comics. And brilliant work that he was doing. And I've been accumulating this stuff over a period of time and translating stuff from Portuguese myself so I can understand it. But
wow.
It's been a large ongoing project I've been working on. That's probably the next thing that
I look forward to learning more. And your website is called what again, Ken?
Okay, well, I have a couple under probably the Comics Detective is the one that's best known.
Yeah.
Which is what I've been called a lot of things, but the Comics Detective is one of the nicer things I've been called, because I don't really consider myself a historian. I don't have the credentials and stuff like that. And, what I do is I find information, I just present it to people. To me, that's detective work. And,
yeah. Well, I got to tell you, the Comics Detective is great branding. I love it. I love the content.
Well, if you notice it, if you flip it around, it's Detective Comics. That was purposely, I did it like that.
There you go.
Anyways, that's me.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Ken. And
Sure.
Danny, you're a busy man always. Just tell us the first 35 things that you're
35. Well, of course, I'm still promoting the Marvelous Life, the amazing story of Stan Lee.
Great.
And I read the audio book. So if you like listening to this, imagine 14 hours of it.
Oh,
now, how much would you pay? I'm doing a whole bunch of other panels for the San Diego Con. A couple of Will Eisner panels, a panel with Travis Langley and a bunch of superstar comics writers about neurotic superheroes and the writers who love them. But the one that might be most relevant to this is a panel I've already recorded with Robin Green, who was the author of the article about Marvel that appeared in Rolling Stone in September 1971. So Robin Green is a woman who succeeded Flo Steinberg as Stan's assistant, but then went on to an incredible writing career on The Sopranos and Northern Exposure, and the co-creator of the show Blue Bloods.
Yeah.
So she came back to talk about working at Marvel and then about coming back to research and write the article. And I have Roy Thomas and Jean Thomas, his ex-wife, and Mimi Gold, and I know I'm leaving out people. Linda Fight. So it's an incredible, that's a special panel, and probably like this panel, we have to keep it to a certain length for the con, but after it officially debuts, we can put the full length one on YouTube. I'm hoping you will do that too. Of course, Will Eisner Week. So please, folks, check. And we have Will Eisner Week stuff from this past March online on YouTube. A lot of fascinating stuff with very interesting people. And I'll be doing, as I said, my non-controversial books about Jack Ruby and Bob Dylan coming up. Finally, I'll be doing. I have done and will continue doing events on a new exciting website called Comixplex, COMIXPLEX.com. So keep checking that. It's a very exciting site, and you can see in their archive some of the stuff I've already done for them.
Oh, that's great. Well, good. Well, thank you all. I appreciate your writing skills, your efforts, your research you put into all these things, and especially your time tonight. Thank you all. I can't wait to see you in person.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
We meet everybody.
All right.
Stay
Thank
well.
you. Bye-bye.